you're interested in expanding your universe, each one of them will have something that's interesting and new.
It all takes place in the space of less than an hour.
The questions were very knowledge-based. Take the work hat off, look at something cool, and think about things in a different way.
It's my pleasure today to introduce Sean McQuaid from ERCE. He's the principal geophysicist. If you'd like, Sean, please could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Gillian. So I've been in the industry about 35 years. I started off in seismic processing with a company called Ensign Geophysics, then moved over to BP and worked in structural and thermal modeling and eventually into things high-tech sort of geophysics, AVO, AI, that sort of stuff. Set up my own company called Lithology and Fluid Prediction from Seismic, probably the longest name for a company in our industry. Ultimately ended up at ERCE, was a director there for geophysics for a number of years. Stepped back a little bit to allow succession planning, if you like. So I'm still working there, doing a lot of sort of expert witness work at the moment. So I guess
Great.
that's me.
Fine, perfect. And so your talk today is, the title is Seismic Processing. Who needs that anymore? So what a great title. And are you ready to go with your talk?
Certainly am.
Great. So your 20 minutes starts now.
Okay.
Thank you.
I will try my best. We might have to talk quickly, but anyway, let's see. This talk, Gillian, stemmed from talking to university students, some of the sort of masters that I was teaching. I'd meet them at conferences and they say, yeah, I want to get into seismic processing. And over the last few years, I've found it a difficult sell, really, as to, would you really do 40 years in seismic processing? And indeed, it was culminated with my nephew asking me the same kind of question. So I had in my head, well, would I embark on a 40-year career in oil and gas and seismic right now? So this represents my thoughts on the subject of sort of collate, and hopefully it will provoke a conversation, lively conversation afterward. Now, I have to say that the irony is not lost on me in doing this. If you were going to pick 1 week in a 170-year history of the oil industry, the 1 week you wouldn't do something about whether there's a career in the oil and gas industry would be this week, given where oil prices went. However, we're talking about a 40-year career, so we need to think a little bit more long-term than that. So I'll take you through what I think. I'm going to approach it looking at 6 topics, and those 6 topics are the oil industry and global warming, the advent of cloud computing and the implications of that with respect to sort of telecoms and so on, and the ability to do complex algorithms, given we've got a lot of power at our fingertips now, being able to do complex algorithms, and of course the impact that has on things like drones. And they break out essentially into 2 categories: the socio-economic, and then there's the technological. You'll notice that there's a horrible virus in here, and I guess really in terms of what's happening over here, there's a bio-socio-economic platform or forum that we should discuss things in the context of. I won't be doing that today, but what I'm going to do is going to talk about these 2 items. I'm going to start with technology, and then we'll move over to socio-economic. So first of all, I said I would produce a couple of slides about why seismic is so great, and hopefully you'll see why. So this is technology, and we're looking at seismic as we know it. So we're going to start with a little bit of fun. This is a score. Lithophonography. A few years back, a student came to ask if he could do a summer project with me, and the one thing I've always wanted to know was what seismic would sound like. We put this seismic source into the ground, it then bounces back up and we listen to it. And of course, we record that electronically, but what would it actually sound like? So what we did was we took a gas field, and you can see that, there's a rise of the top of the reservoir interval here. And there's a gas field here. And we took the gathers, and we took the near, mids, fars, and ultra fars, and we calculated what the central frequency and the mean amplitude of each of those are for that top reservoir. And then we converted it into the audible range. It's in the middle of the keyboard. And we converted that into chords. So each one of this represents the nears, the mids, the fars, and the ultra fars. And so now we've got a chord. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play that through for you. But if you know anything about AVO with the seismic, you will know that, and if you've got gas in the far offsets, they brighten up, and you often see a drop in frequency. Well, you can see that drop in frequency there on those ultra fars, and you can probably see that in the fars there as well. So let's kick it off, and this is the sound of Mother Earth. Here we go. A big bottom F. What do you think?
Wow, that's amazing. I've never heard anything like that before. It sounds absolutely beautiful as well.
It's quite ethereal, isn't it?
That's really impressive. Wow, great.
Right. Anyway, okay, so it's interesting stuff, is seismic. Broadly speaking, the two things that we get out of that seismic is seismic can help us to see fluids, and it can help us to see rocks. My best example in my career is probably the following as an example of seeing hydrocarbons. This is a four-way dip anticline. It's actually a gas field. The fielder's name is a female name, just a normal Christian name. But you can see the amplitude truncation with depth. There's a contour coming through where the gas-water contact is. And you can see the effect it has on the similarity and the effect it has on instantaneous frequency here. A beautiful example of the way that seismic can help us to actually see fluids. In reality, I think they should have called this Mo. If any, amongst the older members, Gillian, some people will know the Three Stooges, and he has the most remarkable haircut. And I must admit, it does remind me of this. They should have called this one Mo. Close. But what is the value of seismic? And this is probably the best demonstration I've got about how valuable seismic can be. You talk about a gas field here. Seismic interpretation is being done, and this is now a depth model, and it's showing you the height above the hydrocarbon water contact. We have a number of wells on here, so we know exactly what the depths are here. However, the way that we choose what the depth is at this location is based on the two-way time interpretation plus the velocities, and as a result, if you have uncertainties in the velocities, then these things will vary. So here's a Monte Carlo simulation of 100 velocity models. You can see all these models here that are changing up here, and you can see that everything is staying constant there. However, you saw that they were wobbling here. What I want to point you to, we'll do it again now, but can you see here, this is actually showing you what the value is, because if we've got different models, they've got different volumes, and those different volumes have got more gas or less gas in them, and as a result, we can allocate a value. So keep your eye on this now here. So we'll press this and look at this. Can you see my cursor? You can see the red ring growing up there, Julian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's going from about 5.4 to about $6.4 billion. So that is an indication of these little wobbles around here give you uncertainty to the tune of $1 billion on this particular field. Now, if our seismic can get better and reduce those wobbles, it's an indication of how valuable that seismic is. So hopefully within those 3 slides, I've told you, one, it sounds beautiful. 4 slides, sounds beautiful. You can use it for fluids. You can also use it for lithology. But on top of that, the value can be immense if you get it right. Mm-hmm. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move over to processing. I'm going to look at processing as we are about to know it. So this is really kind of the front end of where we're processing. I love this slide. It's something that comes from ExxonMobil's website, and it's an explanation of the evolution of migration. 1990, we had pre-stack time migration. It moved on to, in 2000, pre-stack depth migration, and today we are seeing in color. So you can see here a seismic section. When we're going through to PSDM, we can see there's much more resolution. We can see there's more continuity and so on. However, we're still in black and white. Mona Lisa looks a bit better here, but here we've got color. And the reason for that color is because we've got things like FWI, which is starting to give us independent measurements of what are the parameter intervals between these two reflections, and therefore we're getting that extra piece of information. What does that mean for us going forward as processors? Well, for starters, it means automatic picking of velocities. When I started in the 80s with Ensign Geophysics, I used to spend all Monday morning basically ripping up bits of paper so as to get my semblance spectra, and then pick those with a pencil, rubbing them out every now and again, drawing lines through them, giving them to the drafting department to digitize, because there was one digitizing table that we had, so that ultimately I would end up with this table of two-way time VRMS velocities, and then we would get on with our processing. This does it for us automatically. There's an independent determination of velocities. And the reason I say that is because this is a well that's been laid on top, and you can actually see the sonic log, and you can see the red curve. That red curve is in fact the velocities from that inversion. So this technique is providing us with this kind of information. Right. So the modern processing technique it could be sort of similar, simplified, if you like, in this way. We start with whatever we know in the area. We take our shot records. We can do this high resolution velocity inversion and get these kinds of images out. We can take our conditioned image gathers. We can stick that into those two into a pre-stack depth migration, produce depth structures, and come up with those gross rock models that I showed you earlier, where we were identifying the value. At the same time, you could take that output along with this velocity field and use that to produce reflection amplitude inversions and get these kinds of images like I showed you earlier, which is showing you the lithology variations. And of course, because we've got something which is an independent indication of, for example, velocity, we can use that in our we can use that to look for non-reservoir properties like TOC and overpressure. So just simplified workflow of modern processing. What I'm going to show now is the key to the talk, and that is a next step. When I say I don't mean the next, I mean an example of where we might go. Okay. I've already explained to you about full waveform inversion, but taking those exact shots and with the automatic velocity field, you can put it through a thing called reverse time migration, and you can get this out straight away. Okay, so this is now the seismic data processed for you. Anybody who's a processor in the audience will look at this and say, haha, but what about all these are multiples that are coming through. These are seabed multiples, and we'll have interbed multiples in there as well. Now, my key point of the talk is this. Do we use our conventional approach to processing and say, right, okay, I need to work out how to eliminate this information so that I can get what's underlying it? Or do we change the algorithm in the RTM so that we actually take into consideration what we have in terms of multiples and so on? This is not a new idea. This goes back many, many years. I mean, Burkhout has talked about this in the past as well. But because we've got the cloud and all this powerful computing, some of these ideas are now starting to slip into the mainstream. So the second slide I'm going to show you is a reverse time migration, but this time we've modeled it. What's happened is the short period and long period multiples have been modeled in, and we can see that we have got rid of that noise, the sort of thing that a processor does. But now it's essentially been articulated within the algorithm of the RTM. So what we have is the conventional approach, which is what you can kind of see here. All right, this is a Gantt chart, broadly speaking, that we would do pre-processing, manual picking, tomographic updates, migrations, and then a low-frequency model generation, then we get inversion. That takes about 18 months, and it's very human intensive and it's very subjective. The cloud and all this immense computing plus clever algorithms provides us with an alternative, which means that we can very quickly produce FWIs and go into RTMs and do inversions, and that could be over a 4-month period. It's a massive contraction potentially of the processing.
Yes, absolutely. Essential as well, to try and get there.
Well, yes, but what does that mean for the process? Remember, the title of this thing is about, well, the processor. I mean,
what are they going to do then?
What are they going to do? Exactly. So we've got 14 months here. Now, more time here for human intensive interpretation. I'd like to think that, but business is like, and they'll say, well, that means we can improve our turnaround, we can get things done more quickly and so on, and maybe we need less people. So those are all parts of the discussion we can have later, I suppose. But so this is invention, and it is now. We've got demonstrations of these sorts of things happening with their processors. To where do the processors go, or do the processors wither? And do they end up in here? Do they end up in here? Do processors become programmers? Do they become algorithmic experts and so on? Now, I've talked about processing very quickly in the acquisition. I'm just going to run you through this wonderful video to show you the sorts of sort of developments that are happening in acquisition.
Using satellite mapping, an accurate surface characterization will be made to better define non-accessible areas. Airborne multiphysics measurement will be used to characterize the near-surface properties. Taking into account this information, the initial 3D pattern will be adapted to optimize trafficability whilst minimizing deployment costs. All logistics required to deploy the sensors network and source grid will be supplied from the air using a new generation of airship. Once they have arrived at the predefined location, the drone scans its environment below, detecting life forms or obstructions with LiDAR and infrared sensors. If none of these raises an alarm, the drone is allowed to drop its dart and check its coupling after impact. The full seismic data will be transferred in real time and wirelessly to the decision center for pre-processing. Advanced on-site seismic imaging will allow fast-track interpretation. If low-quality areas still remain, the decision to upgrade seismic quality can be made in real time within the decision center. In this case, acquisition parameters can be modified to deliver an interpretable seismic cube, thus ensuring reliable well design and positioning, maximizing the potential of foothills.
What do you think of that?
Wow, that's amazing. So this is from Total, is that right? That's
from Total. Now, this is a 6-minute video, and I've had to compress it to 2 minutes. But so if people want to see the full, they can look at that. And because they talk about biodegradable darts and all that kind of stuff.
Thinking, so, biodegradable darts, Wow, that's just incredible. So is this happening right now, or is it there?
Well,
what do you think?
I certainly know. I mean, you'd have to, maybe the people in the audience that might know a bit better in that case. But I could have replaced this with marine equivalents. There's a thing called Spice Rack out there. There's Blue Ocean Seismic, and those actually do remote drone submarines and so on. So again, talking about the clouds, providing telemetry, providing and you can see that computing that we talked earlier about, the RTMs and so on. If that can be done quickly, and I showed you that was an example of 4 weeks, that you could actually use those algorithmic processes in providing them feedback in this real time. So, this is again a compression that we could be seeing in the acquisition environment to provide us with this kind of
Yeah, but freeing up
improved.
time to look at the data more as well, you know, to
Well,
interpret it.
let's discuss that.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to quickly briefly talk about the socio-economic side of things. I guess the main issue when I look at young students and I'm talking to them, think, well, have we actually got an oil industry because of what's happening with the green agenda and how oil companies are perceived, and of course the service companies that come with it. So is there an oil industry for a 40-year career? There's one figure that comes out of the IEA, which is quite good at trying to explain what's going on. This is the energy requirement in 2014 in exajoules. And what it's showing you is that if we were to take the present day commitments from all the countries about what we're going to do over global warming, this is what would happen between now and 2060. We need to add this, and these blues and purples are natural gas and oil. That's coal there, and these are renewables down here. We'd also need to add this. Okay.
Well, we've got a 20-minute timer going off here. We have to rush you a
Okay.
little bit. I'm afraid.
Right. Okay. To get this, what could happen in the 2-degree scenario is that we could end up with losing these fossil fuels and ending up with a reduction in the amount of hydrocarbons and fossil fuels being extracted coming down by 40%. So somewhere between, business as usual and half of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of an indication of what's going on there. The other thing is, have we got enough reserves? Well, this shows you basically how many years worth of reserves each area has. On average, was something like 50 years. Okay, so if you opened up your fridge and you said, you're in COVID environment, you're locked in. Have I got enough food to get us through a transition over a 30-year period? We've got 50 years. Well, what should we explore for anymore? Well, I guess one of the answers to that, or counters to that, we can maybe discuss is that countries with poor reserves, the security will want to explore more, or they want to buy oil. And the other thing is that some countries that got good reserves will want to appraise and make sure that they're using the best value first. So we've got to remember, what we have to remember is that with this new approach to seismic, there's got considerable value in it. And these new techniques, if we're going to get that value, they are new techniques, they need new acquisition. So there could be something going forward. This slide shows you typical geophysical techniques. We say this was kind of typical of what you would get within an oil field. You've got sort of 2D, 3D surface, CD, in satellite interferometry and so on. It looks typical for what we got. Actually, it's not. It's actually a CCS monitoring model. A key point is in this statement here. The 2DS, in other words, 2-degree scenario, ultimately requires CO2 to be put in the ground at the same rate as present global production.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that sort of rate.
Yeah, it is massive, and it needs monitoring for at least 50 years. Absolutely. Now, we could discuss afterwards about whether this is actually going to happen. People, governments, and so on, and but I mean, there's a lot of nuance to this, but it is potentially an enormous area.
Absolutely is, and it requires a lot of these future skills. So
my final slide. Okay. Yeah. Would I be a seismic processor now, or indeed, would we recommend getting involved in seismic to our younger members? Well, let's have a look at a CV. If we had a CV and it looked a little bit like mine, which was certainly with the processing days, which was I do data input, time series processing, mute picking, velocity picking, migration application, final stack products, report writing in the oil and gas industry. This is typical kind of functions that we would do. And you said going forward 40 years, is that going to be around? I'm not so sure. Bit of a scratchy chin there. However, if I were to do exactly the same work present day with what I showed you earlier with FWIs and RTMs and all that kind of stuff and what Total showed, I do big data integration from various devices, big data analytics in real time to optimize data collection, enhanced predictive analytics, using deep learning, nonlinear modeling and inversion techniques to predict subsurface rock and pore fluids in the energy and carbon capture industry. Okay, I wouldn't be a processor, I would be a big data analyst. And that would make me somebody that might be attractive, not just within our industry, but across a whole gamut of different sectors. So that could be where we could lie. So question is this the future? Discuss. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, listeners, I'm ready to get your questions, and if you'd like to use the raise hand function, should be on the bottom of your screen, fire away and I can unmute you. So a question from Elia. Are you ready, Elia? I'll allow you to give your question. You unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me clearly?
I can, thank you, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good talk, Shane. It's a good to see where we need to head. So myself, I'm a processing geophysicist working with Seismic Image Processing Limited. So I have a question on RTM. So where we are with regards to generating the gathers, either offset or angle gathers, which will be feed into the inversion or to generate any further attributes.
Yeah, good question. I'm a generalist as opposed to a seismic imager. So I mean, if there's somebody out there, and I'm sure there will be lots of people that know a lot more about this than I do, but you're absolutely right. I mean, RTM does provide you with gathers and so on, but least squares RTM, it provides you basically with an Earth model, and so the challenge going forward is actually converting those into something either where we derive the elastic parameters as part of the process, or we come up with something which is similar to what we're comfortable with, which is common image gathers and so on, or angle gathers and so on, so that we can then apply our conventional procedures, for example, AVO and using the Zierpitz equations and so on. So jury's out as to where you would be on that going forward in the next 40 years, but just the way that things are going in terms of computing and ability to model in these things, maybe we will end up, you can see the situation where we could end up with an algorithm which actually is providing us with a lot of these as part of the as part of the inversion process, in kind of in a one-stop shop. Long way to go on that, but as far as I understand, but I'd be quite happy to hear other people's, I would defer to other people's comments that might know more about this than I.
Great. So is there anybody out there who wants to raise a comment, or Elia, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, that's fine. So I just want to have, if Shane can comment on where we are with the elastic FWI.
So Sean, can you comment on where we are with elastic FWI?
Not really as a technician. I know where it sits in terms of challenges. It requires a phenomenal amount of compute power at the moment, so we're doing our best just trying to get acoustic FWI off the ground.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Elia. So we've got a question here on the chat from Dalka Tor. Why do you not need pre-processing for the proposed flow? RTM still needs noise attenuation, etc., and also by multiples modeled in. I assume you mean that the reflectors that generate the multiples are included in the velocity model. That's one part. Is that a correct assumption?
Well, again, like I said, I'm a generalist, but yes, there is pre-processing involved, or I should say, preparation of your data to get yourself to use the existing algorithms. Mine is more of a philosophical comment that going forward over the next 40 years or so, what's going to happen? Are we going to go down the route of parceling out the pre-processing and trying to get your data right so it works within the confines of your data? of your processing, or do we have compute power to provide us with the ability to, like you say, model in the multiples, but the two-way time propagators, and so to provide and the free surfaces for us to model in that data. What I might say is that RTM I did show you was done in 4 weeks, so there wasn't a massive amount of pre-processing or condition of the data to go to that. So, there are promise. There is promise in that respect.
Yeah, and presumably, the pre-processing is also open to, cloud compute as well, and doing different working that differently. And there's a second part to Belka's question here, which is that you mentioned this in relation to cloud. And is this because you think that to generate a glossy model of sufficient resolution and use, and use this in RTM requires more computational power than is usually available? So you get hit that in relation to the cloud, is it because you think that to generate a glossy model of sufficient resolution and use it in RTM needs more computational power than is usually available? Sean?
Well, I certainly know that the amount of computing that's required for sort of FWI goes up as we know, as a fourth power of frequency. So it needs a phenomenal amount of computing power, and you take the ambitions of Doug in terms of trying to get to exaflop status and so on. You just need a massive amount of compute power for FWI, and the RTM is using sort of backward propagations and the same kind of the same kind of techniques, analytic techniques. So again, it does need quite a lot of power, and certainly if it's inevitable, we end up having to use more power as we go forward.
Yeah, more compute power, and the advantages of that are huge, and it's available. And I sense a certain amount of reticence sometimes for companies to go and to use cloud compute. So
yeah, well. Yes, I mean, in terms of security, I guess.
Yes, I believe there's concerns over that, but I mean, we've been assured, certainly in our members' meetings and so on, that the security element of it is not an issue. So I mean, maybe that's controversy in itself. So another comment on the chat is from Daniel Davies. Both wind farms and CCUS have a need for seismic acquisition and processing. Absolutely, they do, and they will. So we shouldn't limit ourselves to finding fossil fuels as our scope, but also installing and safe monitoring. Yeah, I think I would wholeheartedly agree with that, Daniel. And I don't know, Sean, are you seeing any increase in your own sort of work or your own colleagues and associates in these areas?
You could, as you saw on that last slide, barring the present catastrophic oil price and coronavirus and massive layoffs, it's apart from that. It honestly feels like, what did the Romans ever do for us, kind of thing. Yes, we do, for example, seismic process associated with wind farms. You have to, it's very shallow seismic to help sort of define the foundation designs for the offshore wind farms. But not only that, but also the cable, the export route from the wind farm back onshore. So yeah, we've been involved in doing that. It's not. The techniques that you use in that are no way as sophisticated as we're doing to be able to do subsoil imaging or whatever. But yes, you're right.
Don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. Well, it's really difficult, and but there's also, I suppose, it's the scale of this and the expansion of these of offshore renewables. There's sure huge opportunities there as well as in the subsurface. But I guess the talking about the carbon capture, storage, and potential hydrogen storage, etc. We are going to be needing ever more sophisticated means of monitoring the behavior of these fluids in the subsurface if this scale of carbon capture and storage is going to be realized.
If the public ask us to put, or ask people to put something into the ground, the public will also want people to measure it to make sure it stays in the ground.
I agree, and that's very, very much the case. Yeah. So having it's a reticence for raising of hands and going live, but don't be scared, people. But I have got other questions here in the chat. So from Alexi, just to clarify, could a person with data science and oil and gas background qualified for a seismic processing job? Yes, I guess that's great. Yeah, could a question with if you've got data science background in oil and gas, could you go and work in seismic processing? That's the question. Go the other way, yeah.
Oh, the other way. Now, I'll tell you just a little story about my wife's an academic, and she's in the upper atmosphere. Interestingly, using kind of similar techniques. And her last two PhD students, actually, the penultimate actually went into FWI. But the last one went into the fashion industry in big data. Yeah. Wow. So it was using exactly the same sort of techniques, but in the case of the latter one, she was her interview was they give her a whole lot of addresses and told her to pick out automatically which ones are red. And so they had to go through data processing for her, and she had to demonstrate a procedure where she could get red dresses out of all these images. So it's this crossover which I think is rather interesting. I think where we are in terms of seismic processing is it's a very specialized kind of role at the moment. And I do know somebody that we've had generic science physicist that tried to get into the industry and was told that didn't have any geology, and therefore couldn't get in on that. But what we're talking about is massive matrix inversions, looking at nonlinear models. There's a degree of generality about those kinds of skill sets. So possibly going forward, but I think at the moment, because we're still fairly linear and conventional in what we think seismic processing is, it might be difficult right now, especially with a catastrophic oil price, coronavirus, and massive layoffs. It's going to be very difficult. But
I think that there are loads of opportunities we need more people with data science background in oil and gas as well, don't we? So there will be opportunities.
Well, one of the absolutely. I mean, one of the issues that concern me, and again, it's one of the reasons I put this thing together was, we've dropped from 14th to 35th most popular industry for graduates.
Yeah.
And the green issue is a massive issue for us. You go and talk to people in universities, and obviously they think, well, why should I get involved in the oil industry? And yet we know some fantastic people, brilliant inventions that have been made in it. Surely we don't want to see that disappear, but we need young blood coming in, and they need to feel comfortable about who they are and why they're doing what they're doing.
Yes, absolutely. So we've actually got a raised hand from Nathan Payne. Hi, Nathan. I'm going to unmute you and please fire away with your question. You need to unmute yourself now. You've got permission to talk.
Okay, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Hi, Julia.
Hi.
Hi, Sean.
Nice. Hi, Nathan.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it. I liked your carbon capture slide. My question is, my first project as a processing geophysicist about 8-10 years ago was actually a carbon capture sort of potential site, and I sort of feel like not a lot has happened since then, but which is a shame, and we need to do a lot more. So my question would be, what are your thoughts on how we can fund it? How can we make this an attractive business for people to go into and really get their teeth into over the next 50 years?
Yes, I mean that is a fantastic question, and it's one that I'll be puzzling over in the not too distant future. The issue is that carbon capture is a little bit like buying an insurance. The progression that we've done in terms of decarbonisation is that we've taken the low-hanging fruit first, which is basically going out there and producing wind farms and solar panels and so on. Because you produce something, you produce electricity, you can charge electricity, you get your money back. What we're asking people to do here is invest. For example, the Gorgon project down in Australia, $40 billion to do CCS, $40 billion. And Why do they do it? They in that particular case, it's because they had some commitments with the government. If we don't do CCS, and according to the standard IPCC models and so on, we will not get to our 2-degree scenario. We need to get something like 5 gigatons of CO2 per year actually sequestered, and that's the reason why you end up with the number there about global production. People have to accept that they have to buy insurance. You wouldn't buy insurance in a house if you've never been burgled. As soon as you're burgled, you think maybe I should get some insurance. The problem is we don't have a second chance on this, and therefore you're asking people to buy insurance when they're not even sure whether they'll ever get burgled or whether there isn't such a thing as a burglar out there. So the question is, how do we get that money? The obvious ways that's happening in places like, for example, California and in Canada and in Europe to some degree is to put a price on carbon, so either through, for example, tax breaks and so on. Now the thing is,
I'm going to have to rush things now because we're reaching the end of our
all right.
40 minutes.
Okay.
That actually does accord well with another question with what's the biggest barrier to implementation, but if you give you a few more seconds to finish what you were going to say, Sean.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So essentially, you've got to have governments saying, "Thou shalt not, you shall not commit over a certain amount of CO2, and if you do, you're going to get punished." Or somehow the money, it needs to be propagated through into the end user's cost, for example, which is what's been essentially done, for example, with wind farms and so on. So you've got sort of taxation, limitations, and value propagation, if you like.
Yeah, it's a cost game. Where's the value in it, and at a high cost?
At the end of the day, the public have to pay.
Yes, well, exactly. Somebody has to pay. Okay, folks. So I just want to say thank you very much to Sean. That was an absolutely excellent 20 minutes, a little bit more talk, but I loved the music, the seismic music, and the video from Total. And I think that the ending note here on CCS is, and other applications of seismic in the renewables and for the foreseeable future of energy, offshore and onshore, is extremely poignant. There's a few more questions here in the chat. I'm very sorry we don't have time to redo all of these, but you can of course go back to Sean via our website and ask questions that way. So all that remains is me to say thank you very much and goodbye, everybody.